Story 1: The Roar and the Glowing Eyes. Lost Lake wasn't on any map you'd find at the gas station in Ludlow, Maine, but the locals knew it. A blackwater hole tucked deep in the woods, where the pines grew so thick they swallowed the sun, and the air always carried a chill, even in July. Tom Ellis and Jerry Boone had been fishing there since they were kids, sneaking out with their dad's rods to catch bass and swap stories under the stars. Now, at 23, they were still at it. Tom with his broad shoulders and easy grin. Jerry leaner, quieter, with a scar across his knuckles from a bar fight he wouldn't talk about. They worked at the pulp mill by day, but nights like this, clear, crisp, with the moon a thin crescent, called them back to the lake, to the rickety bridge that spanned its narrowest point. They'd set up under the bridge that Friday, a spot where the shadows were deepest and the fish bit best. Tom had his tackle box open, a tangle of lures and hooks, while Jerry rigged their rods, the lantern between them casting a warm glow on the rocky bank. They'd brought a 6-pack of Budweiser, a bag of chips, and Tom's phone, propped on the tackle box, playing Men in Black 2 on low volume. Will Smith's voice a faint hum against the lake's stillness. The fish weren't biting much, but they didn't care. It was the ritual, the quiet, the way the world felt far away out here. Just the two of them and the night. It was pushing midnight when the air changed. Tom felt it first, a prickle on his neck, like the static before a storm. Though the sky was clear, he glanced at Jerry, who was staring at the water, rod loose in his hand, brow furrowed. "You feel that?" Tom asked, voice low. Jerry nodded, slow, his eyes flicking to the trees across the lake, where the darkness was absolute, a wall of black that swallowed the lantern's light. "Feels like we're being watched," Jerry muttered, and Tom forced a laugh, cracking another beer. "Probably a raccoon, man. Don't spook yourself." They went back to the movie, Tommy Lee Jones deadpanning about aliens, but the unease wouldn't lift. The lake was too quiet. No frogs croaking, no fish splashing, just the soft lap of water against the rocks and the hum of the phone. Tom's line tugged once, faint, but when he reeled, the hook was empty, the bait gone. "Damn," he grumbled, reaching for a new worm, when a sound tore through the night. A roar, deep and guttural, so loud it shook the bridge's beams. It wasn't a bear, not a wolf. It was something else, something primal, lasting 20 seconds before it cut off, sharp as a snapped bone. They shot to their feet, beers forgotten, the phone tumbling into the dirt, Men in Black still playing, absurd against the echo of that roar. "What the hell was that?" Jerry hissed, grabbing the lantern, its light swinging wild. Tom snatched his flashlight, clicked it on, and aimed it across the lake, the beam slicing through the dark. 2 eyes glowed back, yellow, unblinking, low to the ground, maybe 30 yards off, staring right at them. "Jesus," Tom breathed, the light trembling in his hand. The eyes were too far apart for a fox, too low for a deer, and the way they held the light, steady, predatory, made his stomach lurch. "Coyote?" Jerry whispered, but his voice shook, and Tom shook his head, stepping back, the rocks crunching under his boots. "That ain't no coyote," he said, keeping the beam on those eyes. They didn't move, just watched, unblinking, as the roar's echo faded into the pines. Tom's mind raced. Bears didn't sound like that. Wolves didn't either, and whatever this was, it wasn't running. It was waiting. He grabbed his rod, started reeling fast, the line whipping through the water, while Jerry yanked their gear together, lantern swinging, chips spilling across the ground. "We gotta go," Jerry said, voice tight, and Tom nodded, still watching those eyes. He swept the light again. They'd moved, closer now, maybe 20 yards, sliding left through the tall grass that edged the lake. "It's coming," Tom rasped, dropping the rod, grabbing his tackle box. They moved fast, stuffing gear into bags, the lantern's glow flickering as Jerry slung it over his shoulder. The eyes vanished into the grass, and for a moment, Tom thought it was gone, until the grass rustled, a low growl rolling out. Closer, the sound of something big shifting through the reeds. They didn't talk, just ran, bags banging against their thighs, the bridge's beams creaking as they crossed back to the trail. The path to the truck was a quarter-mile through that grass, a narrow cut of dirt and rocks, and Tom's flashlight bounced, catching glimpses of the lake behind them. The water black and still. The growl followed, steady, and he knew, whatever it wasn't done with them. Lost Lake had always been a place of stories, whispers of things older than the town. And tonight, under that thin moon, Tom and Jerry had woken one up. Tom Ellis and Jerry Boone bolted down the trail from Lost Lake, their breaths ragged, gear bags banging against their legs like dead weights. The bridge's creak faded behind them, its rusted steel swallowed by the night, but the growl followed, low, steady, rolling through the tall grass like thunder on the horizon. Tom's flashlight beam jerked with each step, cutting wild arcs through the dark, catching the lake's black surface one last time before the trees closed in. Jerry's lantern swung, its light flickering as he stumbled, the spilled chips crunching underfoot, an absurd reminder of their interrupted night. The eyes, those glowing yellow orbs, were gone, but the sense of being hunted clung to them, thick as the mist rising from the ground. Tom's ankle twisted on a rock, and he cursed, catching himself on a pine, bark biting his palm. "Keep moving," Jerry hissed, voice tight, his scar gleaming white under the lantern's glow. The growl grew, a rumble that vibrated through the earth, and Tom risked a glance back. The grass parted, a shadow shifting, low and broad, moving fast. "It's in there," he gasped, pushing Jerry forward, the trail narrowing to a ribbon of dirt flanked by reeds and thorns. The truck was ahead, parked at the trailhead, a quarter-mile of blind run, and every step felt like a plea to make it out alive. The roar came again, closer now, a bellow that shook the leaves overhead, and the grass rustled violently, a wave of motion heading their way. Tom's flashlight caught a glimpse, something massive, hunched, with limbs too long, eyes glinting before vanishing into the dark. "Go, go," he yelled, shoving Jerry, their bags snagging on branches, the lantern's glass rattling. Jerry tripped, landing hard, the lantern rolling, its light spilling across the path. Tom hauled him up, the growl now a snarl, and they ran, the trail a blur of roots and stones underfoot. A rock gave way beneath Tom, his foot slipping into a crevice, sharp edges slicing his calf as he twisted. Pain shot up his leg, and he fell, trapped, the flashlight tumbling into the grass. "Jerry!" he shouted, panic clawing at his throat, pulling at the rock, blood soaking his sock. Jerry turned, dropping his bag, and yanked at Tom's leg, the rock shifting but not budging. The snarl was right there, a breath of hot, rancid air on their necks, and Tom saw it, eyes glowing again, closer, a maw of teeth in the shadows, jaws wide and dripping. He screamed, a raw sound, and heaved, the rock finally rolling free, his leg tearing as he pulled it out. They scrambled up, Jerry dragging Tom, the snarl turning to a roar as they stumbled forward, the truck's outline looming through the trees. Tom's leg burned, blood trailing, but he ran, adrenaline drowning the pain, the flashlight lost in the grass. The roar chased them, the ground trembling, and they hit the trailhead, diving into the Chevy, slamming doors, Jerry fumbling the keys. The engine sputtered, caught, and they peeled out, tires spitting gravel, the roar fading as the woods receded in the rearview mirror. They made it to Jerry's place, a cramped trailer on the edge of Ludlow, where Tom collapsed on the couch, leg a mess of cuts and bruises, blood soaking the cushion. Jerry patched him up with a first aid kit, hands shaking, while Tom downed a whiskey, the burn a welcome distraction. "What the hell was that?" Jerry whispered, voice hoarse, and Tom shook his head, the image of those teeth searing his mind. They didn't sleep, just sat there, the TV on mute, replaying the night, those eyes, that roar, the way it moved like nothing human. The next day, Tom limped to the diner, leg bandaged, and overheard the locals, Old Man Tucker, who'd fished Lost Lake for decades, leaned in, voice low. "Heard a roar last night," he said, "like the Wendigo tales my granddad told. Big, mean, takes folks who stray too far." The others nodded, muttering about missing hikers, bodies found torn apart, always near the bridge. Tom's blood ran cold. He'd seen it, felt it. Jerry called later, pale, saying he'd asked around. Folks whispered of a lake beast, older than the town, hungry for blood, its eyes glowing in the dark. They swore never to go back, but the memory lingered, a shadow on their minds. Tom's leg healed slow, the scars a jagged map of that night, and he started jumping at sounds. The wind, the creak of his apartment stairs, the rustle of leaves outside. Jerry quit fishing, took to drinking, his hands trembling over beers at the mill. They didn't talk about it much, but late at night, Tom would wake, hearing that roar, seeing those eyes, and reach for the knife by his bed. Ludlow stayed quiet. Lost Lake, a forbidden memory, but the locals' whispers grew. Another hiker gone, a blood trail by the bridge. Tom knew it was still out there, waiting in the grass, its hunger unfulfilled, and he'd learned the hard way. Some nights, the lake didn't let you go. Story 2. The Man in the Hospital Gown. Rosewood Meadows in Castle Rock was a street of old houses with sagging porches and peeling paint, where the trees grew tall and the wind carried whispers older than the town itself. Sarah Wheeler lived there with her family, a cramped 2-story clapboard with a creaky attic and a basement that smelled of damp earth. At 19, Sarah was the eldest of 3, a college dropout, working nights at the Stop and Shop. Her dark hair always tied back, her hands chapped from bagging groceries. Her brother Matt, 16, was the quiet one, tall, lanky, with a mop of blonde hair. He hid under a baseball cap, spending his evenings glued to his computer, lost in video games. Their parents, Jim and Ellen, worked long shifts, Jim at the mill, Ellen at the hospital, leaving the house to the kids most nights. The house had always felt off, a subtle unease that Sarah chalked up to its age. The floors groaned underfoot, the windows rattled in the wind, and the hallway lights flickered like they were on their last breath. Matt's room was at the end, across from hers, a narrow space with posters of Metallica and a desk cluttered with soda cans. The bathroom sat between them, a cramped space with a chipped sink and a shower curtain that always stuck. Sarah didn't mind. Hemlock Lane was home, the only place she'd known since she was 6. But lately, the quiet nights had started to feel heavy, like the house was holding something back. It started on a Wednesday, late October, the kind of night where the fog rolled in thick off the river and turned the streetlights into ghostly halos. Sarah got home at midnight, feet sore, her apron stuffed with tips, and found Matt awake, headphones on, the glow of his monitor lighting his face. "You're up late," she said, dropping her bag on the kitchen table. He grunted, eyes on the screen, and she grabbed a soda, heading to her room. The house was still, the radiator hissing softly. Juniper, their tabby, curled on her bed. She flipped on Netflix, settling into a rerun of Stranger Things. The familiar hum, a comfort against the fog outside. Around 2 a.m., a scream ripped through the quiet, sharp, raw, coming from Matt's room. Sarah bolted up, heart slamming, and ran down the hall, nearly tripping over Juniper, who yowled and darted under the couch. Matt's door was ajar, his light off, and she pushed it open, the darkness thick. "Matt," she called, voice trembling. Another scream, muffled now, from the bathroom. She grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen, clicked it on, and stepped in, the beam cutting through the dark. Matt was there, pressed against the wall by the shower, face pale, eyes wide, pointing at the curtain with a shaking hand. "What happened?" Sarah demanded, sweeping the light toward the curtain, yellowed plastic, streaked with mold. Matt's breath came fast, his cap fallen to the floor. I saw him," he stammered, voice cracking. "In there." Sarah pulled the curtain back, knife-edge tension in her chest, but the shower was empty, tile cold, drain clogged with hair, nothing but the drip of a leaky faucet. "Saw who?" she asked, turning to him, but he just shook his head, sliding down the wall, knees to his chest. He finally spoke, voice low. A man, in a hospital gown, rocking back and forth, muttering. Sarah's skin prickled, the flashlight beam trembling in her hand. "What did he say?" she pressed, but Matt wouldn't look at her, just whispered, "I'll be good, Mommy," his voice breaking on the last word. She checked the bathroom, windows locked, no sign of a break-in, the air stale and still. "It was a dream," she said, pulling him up, but her own words felt hollow. Matt nodded, reluctant, and they went back to their rooms, lights on, doors open, the house creaking around them. The next night, Sarah stayed up, scrolling her phone, the Stranger Things theme looping low. Matt was quiet, headphoned again, but she kept an ear out, the bathroom door in her peripheral vision. Around 1:30 a.m., the house groaned, a deep shift, and she heard it, a low mutter, faint, coming from the hall. She muted the TV, straining, and it grew, soft, rhythmic, like someone rocking. "Matt," she whispered, but he was asleep, his snores muffled by the headphones. She grabbed the flashlight, stepped into the hall, and froze. The mutter was from the bathroom, the door ajar, a sliver of darkness beyond. She pushed it open, light sweeping the room, empty, but the air was colder, the curtain swaying slightly, though the window was shut. The mutter stopped, replaced by silence so thick it buzzed, and Sarah's breath fogged, despite the radiator's hiss. She backed out, heart pounding, and checked Matt's room. He was still asleep, undisturbed. Back in her bed, she left the light on, knife on the nightstand, Juniper hissing at the door. The mutter didn't return, but the unease lingered, a weight in the house, and Sarah knew whatever Matt had seen, it wasn't just a dream. The next day, she asked around, neighbors, the mailman, anyone who'd lived on Hemlock Lane long enough. Old Mrs. Hargrove, a widow 2 doors down, leaned on her cane, eyes cloudy. That house, she rasped, been odd since the 70s. Used to be a nursing home, shut down after a patient died, wandered off, found in the basement, still in his gown. Sarah's stomach tightened. The mutter, the rocking, it fit. She didn't tell Matt, not yet, but that night she stayed awake, listening, the flashlight ready. Castle Rock had its ghosts, and Hemlock Lane was holding one close. Sarah Wheeler didn't sleep well after Matt screamed. The image of him trembling in the bathroom seared into her mind. Hemlock Lane felt different now. The house on edge, its creaks and groans, no longer just the settling of old wood. She kept the lights on at night, the knife on her nightstand a cold comfort, and Juniper, their tabby, started hiding under the couch, hissing at shadows only she could see. Matt stayed quiet, his headphones on, but Sarah caught him glancing at the bathroom door, his shoulders tense, like he was waiting for something to come through. Their parents, Jim and Ellen, were too busy, Jim pulling doubles at the mill, Ellen on night shifts at the hospital, to notice the change, leaving Sarah to carry the weight of the house's secrets. She dug deeper after Mrs. Hargrove's story about the nursing home. Over lunch breaks at the Stop and Shop, she scrolled her phone, searching Castle Rock's history on spotty Wi-Fi. A library trip with Matt confirmed it. Hemlock Lane had been a makeshift nursing home in the 70s, a cheap operation shut down after a patient, Walter Klein, wandered into the basement during a storm and froze to death, still in his hospital gown. The article was grainy, a photo of Walter, gaunt, hollow-eyed, rocking in a chair during a therapy session, attached to a report of disturbed behavior. Sarah's stomach turned. The description matched Matt's muttering man, down to the rocking, the plea to be good. That night, she tried to talk to Matt, cornering him in the kitchen while he microwaved pizza rolls. "You seen him again?" she asked, voice low. He froze, hand on the microwave door, then shook his head. Too quick. "It was nothing, Sarah. Drop it." But his eyes flicked to the hall, and she knew he was lying. She let it go, not wanting to push, but set her phone to record in the bathroom that night. Camera aimed at the shower, the curtain drawn tight. She stayed awake, Stranger Things on mute, the house's silence pressing against her like a weight. At 2:13 a.m., the muttering started, low, rhythmic, a chant that crawled through the walls. "I'll be good, Mommy," it whispered over and over, coming from the bathroom. Sarah grabbed the knife, her flashlight, and crept down the hall, Juniper hissing from the couch. The bathroom door was ajar, the air inside freezing, her breath fogging as she pushed it open. The muttering grew, the curtain swaying, and she yanked it back. There he was, a man in a tattered hospital gown, skinny as a scarecrow, rocking back and forth in the tub, his skin gray, eyes sunken black. He turned, slow, his head tilting, and whispered, "I'll be good," his voice a rasp that clawed at her spine. Sarah screamed, dropping the flashlight, the beam spinning wild across the tile. The man vanished, the muttering cutting off, but the air stayed cold, the curtain still swaying like a ghost's touch. She stumbled back, knife slipping from her hand, and ran to Matt's room. He was awake, headphones off, face pale. "You saw him," he said, voice flat, and she nodded, tears stinging her eyes. They checked the phone. Nothing, just static. The video blacked out at 2:15 a.m. The bathroom was empty now, the tub dry, but the chill lingered, a presence that wouldn't leave. They told their parents the next morning, over burnt toast and weak coffee. Jim scoffed. Old houses, old pipes. But Ellen's face tightened, her nurse's instincts kicking in. "I've heard stories at the hospital," she said, voice low. Patients who worked at that home said Walter Klein was troubled, kept muttering about his mother, died calling for her. She paused, then added, "Some swore he never left." Jim rolled his eyes, but Sarah saw the flicker of doubt in his face, and Ellen promised to ask around, see if any old staff knew more. That night, Sarah and Matt stayed in her room, lights on, a salt line at the door, something Sarah read online, desperate for anything. At 2:30 a.m., the muttering came again, louder, angrier. "I'll be good, I'll be good," followed by a thud, like something heavy hitting the bathroom floor. Sarah grabbed the knife, Matt a baseball bat, and they crept out, the salt crunching underfoot. The bathroom door slammed open, the man standing there, gown hanging off his bony frame, rocking faster, his eyes locked on them. "Mommy," he rasped, stepping forward, and Sarah screamed, swinging the knife, the blade passing through him like smoke. He vanished, the muttering fading, but a new sound followed, a sob, soft and childlike, from the basement. Sarah's blood ran cold. Walter wasn't alone. They didn't go down, not then. But the next day, Ellen brought a priest, Father Daniels, who blessed the house, his prayers echoing in the empty rooms. The muttering stopped, the air lightening, but the sobs lingered, faint, drifting up from below. Sarah found a photo in the basement later, a Polaroid, faded, of Walter rocking, a little girl's doll at his feet, her name scratched on the back, Ellie. They moved a month later, the house too heavy to bear, but Sarah kept the doll, a small thing with a stitched smile, tucked in a box. She'd hear it sometimes, a sob, a mutter, in her new apartment, faint, like a memory the house wouldn't let go. Matt started sleeping with the lights on, and Sarah kept the knife close, checking shadows for a man in a gown. Castle Rock held its ghosts tight, and Hemlock Lane had left its mark. Walter's plea, Ellie's cry, a pair of lost souls rocking in the dark, waiting for a mother who'd never come. Story 3: The Mysterious Death of the Little Brother. Route 17 in the rural sprawl of Silver Lake Plains was a lonely stretch of blacktop, flanked by fields that stretched to the horizon and houses that seemed to huddle against the wind. The Smith family had moved into one of those houses, a sprawling two-story with peeling shutters and a wraparound porch that sagged like an old man's shoulders. At 38, Daniel Smith hauled logs at the lumber yard, his hands rough as the bark he handled, while his wife, Margaret, 36, managed their 7 kids with a patience that wore thin by evening. The kids ranged from Danny, 13, the eldest, to Timmy, 2, a chubby toddler with a laugh that filled the house until it didn't. The place was big, too big for the noise of a family, and the silence in its corners felt like it was waiting. They'd bought it cheap 6 months back. The realtor, a nervous man named Roy, with a tick in his eye, mumbling about previous owners and quick turnover before handing over the keys and speeding off. The house sat on the edge of town, where the fields gave way to woods, thick with pine and secrets, and the basement door creaked even when locked. Margaret called it a fixer-upper. Daniel called it a steal. The kids, Danny, his 6 older brothers, 3 elder sisters, loved the space, turning the living room into a gaming den with every console they could scrounge. Timmy toddled among them, a bright spot, while the youngest sisters, Melissa and Claire, 4 and 6, clung to their dolls, wary of the dark. It started in late March, the air still sharp with winter's bite, the kind of night where the wind howled through the cracks and the windows rattled like bones. Sarah got home from her shift at 1 a.m. The house quiet, except for the hum of a gaming console in the living room, where Danny and his siblings were sprawled, controllers in hand. Timmy was asleep upstairs, Melissa and Claire tucked in with their nightlight, and Margaret was at a friend's for a girls' night. Daniel worked a 16-hour shift for the state, leaving the older kids to hold the fort. Sarah kicked off her boots, grabbed a soda, and joined the gaming chaos. The familiar clatter a comfort against the house's odd stillness. Around 2 a.m., a thud broke through the noise, sharp, hollow, from upstairs where Timmy slept. Danny paused the game, his brothers and sisters glancing up, the room going quiet. Probably the cat, Jake, the oldest at 20, said, but his voice lacked conviction. Sarah frowned, setting her controller down. "I'll check," she said, standing, the soda can cold in her hand. She climbed the stairs, the wood creaking underfoot, and peeked into Timmy's room, small, with a crib and a mobile of stars that spun lazily. The nightlight glowed soft. Timmy's blanket rumpled, but he was still, his little chest rising and falling. She turned to go when the thud came again, louder, from the closet across the room. Her heart kicked, and she crossed to it, hand on the knob. The air suddenly colder, thick with a smell like mold and iron. "Timmy?" she whispered, but he didn't stir. She yanked the door open, flashlight beam cutting through the dark, empty, just hangers and a few toys. The smell stronger now. She closed it, uneasy, and went back downstairs, the game resuming. But the thud lingered in her mind, a warning she couldn't shake. The next night, Sarah stayed up with Danny in the gaming room. The others crashed out on couches, the house dark except for the TV's glow. Melissa slept nearby, her doll clutched tight, while Claire whimpered in her sleep, a habit since they moved in. Around 2 a.m., a noise rose, soft at first, a shuffle, then a scrape, coming from Timmy's room again. Danny muted the game, listening, his eyes wide. "You hear that?" he whispered. Sarah nodded, grabbing the flashlight, and they crept upstairs, the house groaning around them. Timmy's door was ajar, the nightlight flickering, and the shuffle grew, a dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled. Sarah pushed the door open, light sweeping the room. Timmy was still in his crib, but the closet door was wide now, a shadow shifting inside, tall and undefined. "Who's there?" she called, voice shaking, but the shadow retreated, the scrape stopping, leaving only silence. Danny gripped her arm, his breath fast. "It's nothing," she lied, but her gut told her different. They checked the closet, empty, the smell of mold stronger, a faint dampness on the floor, and went back down, lights on, the unease settling like a weight. The next day, Margaret noticed Timmy clinging to her, quieter than usual, his laugh gone. "He's just tired," she said, but Sarah saw the fear in his eyes, the way he flinched at the closet. She asked the older kids. None had been upstairs. All swore it. That night, she stayed awake, watching Timmy's room from the hall, the flashlight ready. The house felt alive, its silence a mask, and Sarah knew something was in there, waiting, and it wasn't leaving without a fight. Sarah Smith didn't sleep after that second night. The shadow in Timmy's closet burning into her mind like a brand. The house on Route 17 felt alive now, its silence a lie, the creaks and groans a heartbeat she couldn't escape. She kept the hallway light on, the flashlight by her bed, and Juniper, the family tabby, started pacing, hissing at corners where the air turned cold. Danny stayed close, his gaming sessions shorter, his eyes darting to the stairs, while the other kids, Jake, the brothers, the sisters, grew quieter, sensing the shift. Margaret brushed it off as stress, Daniel too tired from his shifts to notice. But Sarah knew something was wrong, and it was in the house with them. It happened on a Saturday, the kind of night where the wind howled off the fields and the windows rattled like they were begging to break. Margaret was at her girls' night, Daniel on a 16-hour shift, and the older kids were gaming in the living room, controllers clicking, the TV's glow a weak shield. Sarah was with Melissa and Claire, 4 and 6, reading them a story in their room. Timmy asleep in his crib across the hall. Around 2 a.m., a scream tore through the quiet. Danny's voice, raw and panicked, from upstairs. Sarah dropped the book, heart slamming, and ran. The girls clinging to her, their dolls forgotten. She burst into Timmy's room, Danny against the wall, tears streaming, pointing at the closet. The door was open, the nightlight flickering, casting jagged shadows. "He's gone," Danny choked out, and Sarah's stomach dropped. The crib was empty, the blanket tangled, a small pool of blood on the sheet. "Timmy?" she whispered, rushing to the closet, flashlight beam cutting through the dark. Inside, Timmy lay still, his tiny body crumpled on the floor, a kitchen knife beside him, blade slick with blood, his neck a red ruin. Sarah screamed, dropping to her knees, the light shaking in her hand, Danny sobbing beside her. Here, Jake and the others piled in, their faces paling, and Sarah pushed them back, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. "Hurry, please," she cried, the operator promising a quick response. Route 17 was near the station. She told Danny to get the others to her room, lock the door, and he obeyed, herding the siblings, their cries echoing down the hall. Sarah stayed, cradling Timmy, tears blurring her vision, the knife glinting in the corner. The smell, iron and damp, filled the air, and she heard it, a shuffle, soft, from the basement stairs. The police arrived fast, sirens cutting the night, and Sergeant Hayes, a burly man with gray stubble, took charge. They found Timmy, called an ambulance, too late, and searched the house. In the basement, they found him, a man, gaunt and wild-eyed, crouched in a nest of blankets, cans, and clothes. A drifter who'd lived there 2 years, unnoticed. His hands were stained, his grin crooked as they cuffed him, muttering about the kid crying too loud. Sarah collapsed, the room spinning. The knife's image burned into her mind. The days after were a blur. Funerals, questions, the man's confession to hiding in the walls, watching, waiting. He'd been a squatter, a previous owner's son, left behind when the house sold, surviving on scraps. The police found a hatch under the stairs, a hidden crawl space he'd used. The blood on his clothes a match to Timmy's. Margaret sobbed, Daniel raged, and the kids clung to each other. The house a tomb. Sarah moved them to a motel, but the image haunted her. Timmy's body, the knife, that shuffle from below. She went back a week later, alone, needing closure. The house was empty, the air thick with memory, and she checked the basement, the hatch open, the crawl space dark. A photo fell from a beam. Timmy, smiling, taken days before, now stained with a bloody thumbprint. She screamed, dropping it, and heard it. The shuffle again, closer, a low growl from the shadows. She ran, the door slamming behind her, the sound chasing her to the truck. The police sealed the house, but Sarah knew he wasn't the only one down there. Months later, in the new apartment, she'd wake to a thud, a shuffle, Timmy's laugh echoing faint. The kids grew quiet, Jake taking up a bat, Melissa clutching her doll. Daniel drank more, Margaret prayed, but Sarah kept the knife close, checking corners, seeing that grin in her dreams. Bangor whispered of the house on Route 17, a place where a child died and something stayed, a shadow with bloody hands, waiting for the next family to fill its silence. In a town where the past clung like damp, Sarah had learned some houses never let go.